Chapter 4, The Company of St. Paul. A quote from Don Duolindo Rutolo. Prayer is man's only strength and God's only weakness. A new family. The Company of St. Paul, henceforth referred to by its initials CSP, and not to be confused with the more well-known Pauline family founded by Blessed Don Giacomo Alberone, was founded in Milan in 1920 by Father Giovanni Rossi, secretary of Blessed Cardinal Andrea Carlo Ferrari, who has suggested its founding. This community, inspired by the charism of St. Paul, was made up of both priests and laymen and women. Its main characteristic was the social apostolate, which it sought to achieve through spiritual, cultural, and social innovations according to the needs of the times. The first group of priests and lay people who founded the CSP dedicated themselves to the social apostolate with the task of refuting atheism and socialism and seeking to help bring believers closer to the faith. The first house, which became the headquarters of the company, was located on Via Santa Sofia and was solemnly inaugurated in 1921 by Archbishop Ch4, soon after created cardinal and then elected to the papacy on February 6, 1922, as Pius XI. He was at this time the Archbishop of Milan, having succeeded Cardinal Ferrari. To tell the truth, some serious problem arose soon afterward because when he became pope, he had to send an apostolic visitor to help resolve some of the controversies. The apostolic visitor, Bishop Carlo Dalmiazzo Minoretti, decided to release the community from their ties with the Archdiocese of Milan and transform it into a religious congregation which would then answer directly to the Holy See. As a result, what was sacrificed most by this was the lay nature of the community. By being transformed into a religious congregation, the members were now called to make the 3 apostolic vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience instead of just the simple promises that had committed them in the past. In the following years, the community experienced rapid growth, and in 1925, Pius XI himself entrusted it to the administrative management of the Osservatore Romano, the newspaper of the Holy See. Shortly thereafter, the important parish of St. Benedict in Rome was also entrusted to the priest of the CSP. The company dedicated itself to the development of the Christian life in the social sphere. To this end, vocational schools were established together with the creation of a cultural club for youth, a library, a movie theater, a low-price cafeteria, a service center to assist people in need, and a home for unwed mothers. The aim of the CSP was to respond to the needs of a modern society which was rapidly changing. In 1925, there arose a need to create an organization that would take charge of pilgrimages. Thus, l'Opera Cardinal Ferrari de Pellegrinaggi was initiated, which was later called Pellegrinati Paolini. The press became another very important means of apostolate for the CSP. They founded La Festa, a magazine for families, Il Carroccio, a magazine for young people, La Fiorita, a magazine for young girls, and Alba, a weekly paper for female employees and workers. They also purchased the newspaper L'Avvenire d'Italia. In the meantime, the company started to spread outside their regional and national borders, expanding to other Italian cities from Venice to Genoa. It also reached several cities in France, Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay, North America, and even made it to Jerusalem in 1923. During World War II, the company sought to help victims of unjust racial laws and to come to the aid of victims of bombings. Because of these initiatives, especially the ones in favor of the Jews, the rector of the house of Via Marcelli, Father Paolo Ligreri, was arrested and sent to the infamous concentration camp of Dachau in Germany. In 1950, the CSP was transformed into a secular institute of pontifical right with various houses and with work-related professional and apostolic activities. From 1992 to 2007, due to various factors, the company experienced a serious financial crisis, which resulted in its being placed under further extraordinary administration by the Holy See. Why was the CSP founded? Blessed Cardinal Ferrari, a man of true faith and great responsibility, felt the need to give the faithful a more integral Christian formation. He was aware that the diocesan clergy were not able to reach all the different areas of Christian life, especially during that period when Eucharistic processions were prohibited and crucifixes were being removed from schools and courthouses. And so he came to realize how that there might exist a more effective way in which men, women, and priests could consecrate themselves to an apostolate outside the temple, a company whose members could be accepted everywhere. At first it was called the Pauline Community, and its priests were simply concerned with the spiritual well-being of its members. But then, as the number of members increased, they began to devote themselves to various apostolic activities. Many of them lived in the large building on Via Mercalli in Milan. Later on, due to their financial difficulties, this building was sold and the main residence of the company was transferred to Via Perugia Hospital in Milan.
Section Father Stefano and the Company. Now we go back to our story. On December 19, 1973, Father Stefano heard these words from Our Lady: "I have chosen you from your infancy and have always led you by the hand. Never have I abandoned you, even when my adversary attacked you and snatched you from me, and was then sure of having conquered once for all." End quote. The suffering he endured after leaving the Franciscan friary was very intense. It was like a sword thrust into his side, a dull and subtle torment which never left him. And the Mother of God was well aware of it. On December 19, 1973, she said, "You have to suffer much. You had to walk often in darkness and abandonment, almost despairing that I had not heard your wails and your cries for help." End quote. He was beaten down, but not overcome. Indeed, Stefano knew that it is by kneeling that one learns how to stand. And with constant prayer, he had become a man forged by trials. He was ready to face religious life. Thanks to the counsel of his benefactor, Maria Bolognesi, Stefano decided to ask to be admitted to the Company of St. Paul. We don't know who his first contacts were. However, we know that he entrusted himself completely to Our Lady and asked her to follow all his steps in this new direction of his life. Let us go back to the first moments of Stefano Gobbi's stay with the company by quoting from the writings of his spiritual director of that time and from the words which he himself wrote. On October 27, 1961, Monsignor Pietro Vittori, young Stefano's spiritual father, sent the following letter to the company. Quote, "I have known Mr. Stefano Gobbi for a couple of years, and I have been very close to him. He confided to me his desire to set out along the road that leads to the priesthood, to which he has felt a calling since childhood. Please allow me to assure you that his behavior is fitting to a person who considers himself as belonging totally to the Lord. Faithfulness in the practices of devotion, abstinence from earthly pleasures, and dedication to apostolic work, especially in approaching those individuals whom the Lord puts in his path, or those whom he manages to find out about. It seems fair to conclude that we are dealing with material that is well suited for the priesthood." Signed, Reverend Pietro Vittori. The following day, October 28, 1961, Stefano wrote the following letter to the superior of the company. "Very Reverend Father, Superior of the Company of St. Paul, I, the undersigned, Stefano Gobbi, humbly request to be admitted to the Company of St. Paul in order to consecrate myself to God as a priest. I was born in 1930 in Dongo, Como, And since my childhood, I have felt a vocation to the priesthood. From the age of 11 to 24, I was in school and completed all my studies, which included the course of theology at the College of the Friars Minor of Lombardy. But in 1954, after I had been ordained a subdeacon due to a grave crisis, I requested to be reduced to the lay state. In these 7 years of living in the world, even though humanly speaking, I managed to create a position for myself, I have come to the realization that my true call in life is that of consecrating myself to God and to the priesthood. I have been guided in this awareness by my confessor and spiritual father, Monsignor Pietro Vittorini, Director General of the Oblates and pastor of the parish of Mount Carmel in Milan. Consequently, while in the world, I continued to live my life for God alone and discovered that its difficulties and dangers were themselves strengthening the spiritual life in me, and that there flowed back to the surface all that God had done for me since my youth. So my vocation has returned fully back to me. I would like to ask you, Most Reverend Father, to accept me into the company of St. Paul, so that trusting in God's help and in the special assistance of Our Lady, I can achieve my deepest desire to become a holy priest according to the heart of Jesus, consecrating my life to the service of the Church in the institute where His will wishes me to be. With respectful and filial regards, yours most devotedly, Stefano Gobbi. He writes, quote, where His will wishes me to be. And yet, many times he had found himself in situations in which he didn't know what to do. Actually, at the beginning of the 1960s, he had also tried to become part of the diocesan clergy and had made inquiries to a few dioceses of the Lombardy region. But he had received negative responses. We do not know the reasons why his requests were rejected. Certainly, his leaving the Franciscans in 1954 and his asking for a reduction to the lay state must have had a great impact. But it is also true that perhaps God allowed this refusal in order that the purification of this chosen soul might be complete. Thus, Father Stefano wrote this brief note to Maria Bolognesi on March 26, 1960. Quote, it was necessary that my faith had to be put thoroughly to the test. Last July, I had an interview with the Bishop of Milan, and what a childish game of inexplicable circumstances. The door is opened, then it is closed. It is reopened, and then it is closed again, this time for good. I tried in Ch4, then I tried other avenues, but without success. Now I am completely resigned. I don't know what to do. End quote. After his first failure in 1954, it now seemed that these additional rejections made him feel unfit and that maybe he didn't have a vocation. But just when everything is going against us and our life seems to be falling apart, one must remember to rely on God alone. In fact, we know that human difficulties are not obstacles to the fulfillment of God's plan. On the contrary, they are the ways along which He makes us move forward. Stefano Gobbi's life must teach us that when everything goes wrong and nothing seems to get accomplished, if we keep faith, then God will intervene. Here is the masterful lesson of the priest from Dongo. The works of God progress among difficulties, because when there is nothing left for us to do or hope for, we must abandon ourselves to God's grace and ask with childlike faith that Our Lady take possession of us. Of course, it is painful to see doors shutting in our face, but such an ordeal is a sign of taking part in the work of God. We understand why sanctity can never dissociate itself from suffering. If sanctity, in fact, unites us to Christ in His death, it also unites us to Christ in the mystery of His reparation. The holier we are, the more we will be called to suffer. For this reason, the greatest saints are those who went through the most intense suffering. Many years later, Our Lady confirmed to Father Stefano how suffering is a part of the way of redemption and of love for Christ. The message of December 19, 1973. The reason for much of their lack of understanding the reason for their sufferings. Oh, how many moments of darkness and of agony they must have had to experience in their lives, these beloved sons of mine. But these have been for them necessary and fruitful moments, because I was thus able to take greater possession of them." End quote. The hoped-for day came with a positive response. The Company of St. Paul, unlike other institutes, was willing to accept him. A month after his first letter, Stefano wrote a second one addressed to the Superior General. "Very Reverend Don Carlo, I am writing you especially to thank you for the kindness and understanding you showed me during our first interview, and also for your subsequent concern. Therefore, my meeting with Don Maggi worked out very well, having found in you, dear Don Carlo, the Father who has opened the door for me." This was a CSP priest who died almost a centenarian in 2011. Yesterday, I had an interview with Don Tori, and right away, I went to my office to hand in my resignation. Now I have time until the end of the month to prepare a few things, to take care of my severance pay, and to go and visit my parents and brothers and sisters at home. I expect to be in Rome either towards the end of the month or certainly by the 1st of December. Don Tori advised me to write to you so you might delegate some students to go and hand in the enrollment form at the Pontifical Lateran University. This was a university that Don Tori referred me to. However, I let you choose the one which would be best for me. In fact, he said that the last day for registration is November 30th. I apologize for any inconvenience, but if registration really closes on the 30th of the month, I will not be able to be in Rome that day. Most Reverend Don Carlo, from now on, I put myself completely into your hands, and I commend myself to your prayers so that the Immaculate Heart of Mary may soon lead me to be a holy priest according to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, as a member of the Company of St. Paul, and to serve the Church with a Pauline spirit. Asking for your blessing, your devoted servant, Stefano Gobbi. Stefano had a strong zeal and desire. If it had been up to him, he would have asked to be ordained a priest immediately. But obviously the company set its own schedule for him. At least at first, he had to complete the CSM, Company of St. Paul, curriculum for theological studies at the Pontifical Lateran University in Rome, the one which was suggested for him to attend. He had entrusted himself to the Blessed Virgin Mary for everything, as he confessed to Maria Bolognesi, his confidant from Rovigo, writing March 26, 1960, "During these years, I had my share of weaknesses, painful experiences, and confusion. And yet the Virgin Mary kept me steadfast and unwavering in my desire to love Jesus alone. She permitted me to be brought back into the world, but by being in the world served only to make me despise it. And then gradually she created in me a pure and selfless love for God, and for many years asked me to give everything without asking for anything in return, and to feel within myself my nothingness." Section, His First Steps. Stefano quit his job and entered the Company of St. Paul in 1961. It had been 7 years since he had interrupted his studies, and now he wasn't young anymore. And though he desired it intensely, it certainly wasn't easy for him to pick up his books again and go back into the routine of lessons, studying, and taking exams. It was both exciting and arduous at the same time. Stefano was 32 when he arrived in Rome at the beginning of July 1962. He had to start all over again with his school schedule, with new friendships and school classmates, and a new city. But he got involved in everything with enthusiasm. He wrote to Maria Bolognesi, "Suddenly the road is opening up for me, and what a road! All my desires, even the least important and human ones, are coming true. To see Rome, to study theology at the university, and so on. I can see the road to the priesthood opening up wide for me, and above all, I can see enormous possibilities to do good ahead of me. I can sing with Mary her Magnificat. Yes, my soul magnifies the Lord. Now now I will always trust in her. I will let myself be guided by her alone. I only want to fall in love with her more and more. I desire that my priesthood be consecrated only to the triumph of her immaculate heart in the world, and through her to the triumph of Jesus. As a student, Stefano Gobbi lived with an international group of students in the House of Religious Formation of the CSP at Villa Bazzi in Via Carini 24 in the Monteverde Vecchio area. The Superior General at the time was Don Pasquale Magni, head of the Studium Christi and a resident in the same house. His motto was, in English, "The Lord sent me among the peoples." And he always encouraged everybody as much as possible to a universal and dynamic evangelization. Stefano was sociable and friendly, but at the same time he could be brusque. Thus, his personality helped him to get oriented to the meandering of activities at the university and to study with classmates who were younger than him. In fact, it didn't take long to make new friends, and among these he got very close to the owners of a restaurant on Via del Gasometro, entering into a friendship which lasted over the years. After he had become a priest, he would often invite himself to lunch at their restaurant. Some of the candidates who joined the CSP were already priests, and therefore they already had received their formation in the various diocesan seminaries from which they had come. Once accepted, there followed a 3-year formation period, which included an in-depth study of St. Paul, his spirituality and works of evangelization, as well as becoming acquainted with the statutes of the congregation. Then, after they had professed their annual vows, they would continue to study until they were ready for the profession of their perpetual vows. This was therefore the procedure Stefano also had to follow, the only difference being that in order to be ordained a priest, he had to get a laureate, or also called a doctorate in theology. At the Pontifical Lateran University, classes were offered in the morning and in the afternoon. Liturgy, pastoral theology, dogmatic theology, canon law, sociology, psychology, missiology, etc. Stefano received excellent grades. Almost all were the highest marks. After his lessons, Stefano had an important engagement, a commitment to remain with the Lord. In order to love a person, one must know him, and to know him, one must spend time with him in order to become more and more acquainted with him. Thus, Stefano could often be seen before Jesus in the tabernacle. As a young man and student, well before his interior locutions began and a new Marian movement requested by the Mother of God appeared on the horizon, he was deeply, interiorly Marian. As we have seen in his letters and in references made up to this point, he entrusted himself to Mary in every situation, and above all, he put his whole life and each step he took into her hands when it seemed as if no new doors would open up. Mary herself became for him the way. He had to be molded by life's trials in order to come to an understanding of this truth. He had to go through various storms to realize that in order to reach God, there weren't any roads or paths. There was only a leap of faith to make, a leap in the dark. He had to fall down, deep down, into the depths in order to end up in Mary's hands. He had to learn to place blind trust in her alone. Every year, Stefano, a candidate for the sacred ranks of the priesthood, as he used to refer to himself in his notes, would write out a very detailed report of his interior life. This is how we know about his daily meditations on the letters of St. Paul. For spiritual reading, he often used the well-known book, The Soul of the Apostolate, by the Trappist Ch4. The figure of Cardinal Ferrari, books by Don Penco and Don Giovanni Rossi, and above all, books on Marian theology were very influential in his spiritual formation. There's a note. There is an interesting testimony told by Francesco Chiesa which illustrates Father Stefano's relationship with Cardinal Ferrari. Quote, as long as he was able, when he was in Emilia-Romagna, Father Stefano wanted to do the cenacle at the shrine of Our Lady of Fontenellotto in the province of Parma. It was at this shrine that the mother of Cardinal Ferrari often came, bringing her little boy. the future cardinal that is, asking for the grace of healing for her son. She obtained this grace, and it was considered a miracle. This episode, which certainly influenced the cardinal himself, is the reason for Stefano's relationship with its founder." End quote. End of footnote. Stefano's prayer consisted in daily adoration before Jesus and the Blessed Sacrament, the Holy Mass more than once a day if possible, daily recitation of the 15 decades of the Rosary, and regular private visits to Jesus and the Tabernacle. He also made weekly confessions, as well as monthly and yearly retreats and spiritual exercises. In his detailed report, he stated that his desire to become a priest and to answer God's call was present and strong within him, and that he wanted to fulfill this desire according to the spirit and rule of the Company of St. Paul. He continued to write to his guardian angel, that is Maria Bolognesi, from Rome, and in his letters he brought up over and over again his great love for Mary and of his belonging entirely to her, such as this quote, November 23, 1962, "O Holy Virgin, listen to my prayer and make me a priest in this way only, holy according to the heart of Jesus, and for the triumph of your Immaculate Heart in the world. Let it be this way or not at all. I consecrate myself completely to her Immaculate Heart. This is for me the only road to follow to become a holy priest." And from another letter in March 25, 1963, "Don't you think this journey of mine towards the altar, so long and so painful, is a special sign of her love? It is a journey along which she guided me day by day through precious trials and sufferings, carrying out her work as a mother, and my success will surely end up being one of her maternal masterpieces." His agonizing and constant need to be a son of the Holy Virgin, so loud and clear, was equaled by his need to become a priest. The priests of the company lived and prayed together in community. Then each one went to take care of the assignments they received from their superiors. There's a footnote. Today there is no longer a real form of community life. Unlike other institutes, says Don Gustagna, we do not have a rule of life that requires the obligation of the community and the common cash fund, or of assignments rigorously established by the superior. We can say that our community is based above all on the freedom, originality, and maturity of the individual, each called to realize himself or herself in his or her commitment to others and in the development of organizations. In the community of St. Paul, there are expressions of a qualified service which are open to humanity's needs of all times and in all types of society. At the time Father Stefano entered the CSP, there were some of these charitable, cultural, and spiritual realities. End quote. End of footnote. To the text. However, there was a problem for Stefano Gobbi. In 1954, he had asked for a reduction to the lay state. He had already become a cleric with the bestowal of the subdiaconate. Then he was given a dispensation, and now he was preparing to ask to return to holy orders as a priest. What would the sacred congregation at the Vatican say? His readmission wasn't going to be accepted easily. He therefore wrote in his annual report, "For this reason, I would like to apply to the sacred congregation as soon as possible in order to ask readmission to the clerical state. I would like to place in focus this profound yet returning aspiration, this supreme goal which guides my every step and awakens in me every desire. The arduous feeling of waiting which I experience, tempered by patience, now impels me to overcome every difficulty with joy, every struggle more easily, and every experience of solitude with the certainty that there is developing in me the unspeakably precious gift of love, your love, O Lord." Section, Father Stefano and the Second Vatican Council. The years Stefano spent in Rome were those of Vatican Council II, 1962 to 65. As a young student with a good religious education behind him, he experienced the council with particular attention, especially since he lived right in the Eternal City. Don Roberto Oscolati, a priest of the CSP, wrote, Rome was a very lively meeting place for bishops and theologians from all over the world, and at Villa Bassi, distinguished guests often were present, so that during our formation we would come into contact with new ways of looking at things, typical of the times of Pope St. John the 23rd and the early years of Pope St. Paul VI. Stefano Gobbi's organizational and human capabilities were soon noticed by his superiors, and although he was only a student, they assigned him the task of working at the press office of the council itself. In this way, he was able to speak with many bishops and enter St. Peter's Basilica with complete freedom. His ID card reads, "The journalist, Mr. Stefano Gobbi of the newspaper Avvento e Fuoco, is authorized to have access to the press office of the Secretary General of the Central Pontifical Preparatory Commission of the Vatican Ecumenical Council too." As the student from Lombardy lived out the council with responsibility and prayer, he wondered if by any chance it had any connection to what the Most Blessed Mary promised at Fatima. "We are certainly living in decisive times for the Church," he wrote to Maria Bolognesi, October 13, 1962. "As the Pope says, pray a lot. This council could truly be the beginning of a new day all over the world. I wonder if it might also be linked to the era of the triumph of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, as predicted at Fatima." End quote from the letter. Stefano always humbly accepted in obedience the directives of the Vatican II Council. Being faithful means accepting and obeying. Faithfulness to the Church will be one of the fundamental characteristics of the future Marian movement of priests. Quote from a message, October 22nd, 1979. "You are being obedient when you give to all a witness of perfect docility to the norms which the Church prescribes for priests." This doesn't mean that during the post-conciliar years, Father Stefano didn't show a deep disappointment at the erroneous interpretation of some of the changes. For example, he did not accept the fact that so many priests deviated from a precise and orderly liturgical behavior, that they would celebrate Mass without a chasuble. He didn't look kindly upon the second Eucharistic prayer because, in his opinion, it diminished the mystery of the body and blood of Christ. He did not agree with the free interpretation given to the sacred liturgy, whereby some priests felt they were authorized to improvise gestures and words as they pleased, as if after the Second Vatican Council, a new and different church had emerged, detached from the context of the preceding church. At times, Father Stefano had a critical attitude towards individuals and their erroneous interpretations, but certainly not towards the magisterium, which, on the contrary, he ardently defended. In the first circular letter of the Marian movement of priests, written in 1973 and sent to 110 priests, Father Stefano writes, "The purpose of this initiative is to promote a commitment of prayer to Our Lady and a personal renewal according to the Council's guidelines." However, we cannot fail to consider that these misinterpretations that arose after the Vatican II Council led to an infiltration of errors that shook the religious and vocational life of many men and women. Therefore, we can say that Father Gobbi lived and obeyed changes made by the Council, but at the same time he was a critic of the increasing abuses he witnessed, especially with respect to the ineffable mystery of the Eucharist. To dialogue with the world by surrendering to it implies rejecting the foundations of our eternal salvation, which were given by Christ to his Church in her 2 millennia of history and sacred tradition. In his encyclical Ad Petri Cathedrum, Pope St. John the 23rd called for knowledge of the truth, pointing out that ignorance of the truth is the cause of many evils for humanity. The truth is that Christ, who made himself truly present in the Eucharist, gave his ministers the power to touch his most blessed body with their hands. Therefore, the concern of those who are called to this vocation must be to live themselves a true Eucharistic devotion, and therefore call the people of God to the same devotion and adoration. This was the constant thought running through Father Stefano Gobbi's mind. The Most Blessed Mary leads us to Jesus and the Eucharist. A devotion to Mary is not an end in itself, because Jesus and Mary are inseparable. Instead, in the post-conciliar period, many people felt that Marian devotion was outdated or that it had to be put aside. But for Father Stefano, this meant working all the more to live the Eucharistic mystery. He simply invited people to follow the gospel, just like St. Francis of Assisi, whose words even today remain effective and holy. Quote, "Consider your dignity, my priest brothers, and be holy, because he is holy. As the Lord God has honored you above all others because of this great mystery, for your part, love, revere, and honor him above everything. May man be struck with fear, may the whole world tremble, and may the heavens exult when Christ, the Son of the living God, is present on the altar in the hands of a priest." End quote. Section on the road to the priesthood. The 2 years of study for his diploma went by, and in the summer of 1963, Stefano obtained the laureate or doctorate degree necessary to move on to the next stage, that of the priesthood. On June 25th, he defended his thesis, assisted by Bishop Ferdinando Lambruscini, entitled "The Right to Property, according to the encyclicals Rerum Novarum, Quadragesimo Anno, Mater et Magistra." He graduated with excellent grades, for which he was awarded the honor of magna cum laude with the signature of the university president, Bishop Antonio Piolanti. After he finished his studies, he finally left the classroom, and while waiting for the big step towards the priesthood, he devoted himself to teaching in schools, something for which he had a natural inclination. In those years, it was easy to find a job as a religion teacher in the public schools, and so in October 1963, Stefano Gobbi got a teaching job in a high school in Rome. He was given altogether 11 classes with a total of 380 students. His method of teaching was straightforward, direct, and captivating. His students understood him and respected him, and this turned out to be useful to him. We will understand this better when we go with him to Milan at the time of the student uprisings. Father Stefano is now writing in his annual report to the company, "I teach the lesson, and then I answer oral and written questions. In spite of the usual problems, I was able to establish a fairly good dialogue with most of the students. In the end, I felt I did a lot of good for many of them. I was responsible for the Christmas and Easter preparations. I worked out the details for Easter Mass and personally prepared the students to fulfill their Easter precept, that is, their annual confession and receiving of Holy Communion. This does not mean that I always succeeded perfectly, especially in regard to discipline and silence in class, since this was my first experience of teaching religion in a public school." End quote. Besides school, Stefano also played an active role in a Roman parish entrusted to the community of St. Paul. Quoting probably the same thing, "I was given full responsibility for the oratory, for youth and student activities. Throughout the year, the following activities were carried out in the oratory: the Youth Olympic Games, soccer championships for youth and adults, competitions for the best Christmas nativity scenes, the Children's Carnival, and the Marian Month with a trip to the Shrine of Divine Love." End quote. He also had a very negative experience in the parish when for a while he felt out of place due to, quote, "an obvious disagreement between the pastor and the parochial vicar regarding the way parish work had to be carried out. Don Gregorini frequently complained to him about the other priests' behavior." End quote. The unfortunate nature of this conflict caused distress to the students as well as to Stefano. He acknowledged the fruitfulness of the CSP's ministry, but at times he saw its limits. Quote, "The vicar's shortcomings made me suffer a lot because of an excessive individualism and a failure at times to give first place to the things of the Spirit." End quote. Stefano was impatient. His desire to walk resolutely towards the priesthood and reach his much-desired goal soon. At the end of August 1963, he wrote to Don Carlo, the superior general of the company, quote, "On September 1st, 1963, I will leave for Rome. I want to be there at the beginning of the month because I have to go to the vicariate for a definitive response regarding school. and especially, as discussed in our last conversation, I wish to submit my petition to the Congregation for the Religious for my readmission to the clerical state during the month of September before the Council opens. This is what I most intensely desire and what I am mostly concerned with. In fact, after these 2 years of waiting and studying, I feel I shouldn't have to wait any longer. Instead, I need to start fulfilling my vocation to the priesthood, which the Lord has called me to. In this sense, I find my first trip to Lourdes to be providential. It is yet another sign of favor and predilection by the Virgin Mary, who has been and is always the way for me to the altar. I will pray at her feet that I may be a holy priest, consecrated to her Immaculate Heart. Above all, I will ask her to remain close to me during this final year of preparation, so that all the waiting, suffering, and hope of these many years of preparation in the world may reach their fulfillment in the full realization of her plan. It seems that the Virgin wishes me to be in Lourdes. It's as if she wants me to understand that she will be closer to me more than ever, so that this last stretch of my journey, which separates me from the altar, will be completed as quickly as and in the holiest way possible.
In any case, the years spent in Rome and in the parish helped him to learn to minister to youth and to practice the virtue of patience. His fellow priest, Father Paolo Gassaga, comments, Father Stefano has not forgotten this beautiful and rewarding experience of assisting the youth at the parish of St. Benedict in Rome. Those who remember him see, on the one hand, his strict discipline regarding personal moral values, and on the other hand, his profound spirituality, combined with a natural inclination to make friends with everyone. This was definitely the personal charism of Stefano Gobbi, respected by the CSP, which in fact allowed him to later embrace the worldwide apostolate of his Marian movement of priests. End quote. Section, the Pauline Pilgrimages. While still waiting to become a priest, the company asked Stefano to collaborate with the Pauline pilgrimages to the Marian shrines of Lourdes and Fatima. Learning of the news of this new assignment, he brimmed with enthusiasm. Confiding to Maria Bolognesi, he wrote on May 18, 1963, "What a joy it will be for me. In fact, yesterday the superior came to let me know that since I don't have to go to Borca this year for the month of formation, it has been decided that at the beginning of July I would be able to defend my thesis in theology, and after defending it, I will then go home for a week and a half to visit with my family. After that, I will go to Milan to accompany the Pauline pilgrimages. So, for the first time, I have been given the great and beautiful grace to go to Lourdes." Young Stefano had a good way with people. Father Gassagna explains, "I remember as a young priest when I began the pilgrimages to Lourdes. I used to stay there as a coordinator for many weeks. Father Stefano always would give me this advice, quote, remember that supervising does not mean giving orders, nor wanting to preside over everything and showing off. Rather, build up your love for Mary and give space to the other priests and lay people, and then you'll see what it's like to have a sense of really being at their service." End quote. It's as if I am now hearing those beautiful words again. Actually, they are imprinted in my mind, and to be honest, I have tried to fulfill them because they are the synthesis of a priestly and religious spirituality in knowing how to put ourselves aside so that others may go ahead to serve the Lord and give glory to Mary, our consolation and hope. End quote. Being the founder of the Marian movement of priests never prevented Father Stefano from feeling he belonged to the company of St. Paul, founded by Cardinal Ferrari. For all intents and purposes, juridically, he was always a priest of the company, and he abided by its commitments even during the years of his intercontinental trips for the movement of priests. Father Gassaga goes on, this freedom of expression, combined with the Institute's desire to be a permanent school of formation for the life of its members, fostered in him an open-mindedness for others and a congeniality with his brother priests, characterized by sincerity, dialogue, and fraternal fondness. When he was present at the CSP priest meetings, he never failed to add his own witty remarks with a relaxing smile. And even if he contradicted others, he used a conversational tone, even though at times he would begin in an instinctive and direct manner. He is a lovely example of a Pauline priest who made himself the servant of all out of love for Jesus and his Blessed Mother, following the example of St. Paul as he traveled throughout the world." End quote. Father Stefano experienced joys and sorrows with the company, and especially hardships during the last years of his life. As mentioned already, the CSP was placed under investigation by the Holy See on more than one occasion. After moving from the Institute's house on Via Marcali to the one on Via Taruggia, Father Stefano was forced to leave this new residence because the building had to be vacated. In a letter left under the door of his room, the superiors of the company asked him to look for another accommodation. This greatly saddened our dear Father Gobbi, who at the age of 80 no longer had a place to live. He was forced to find a new house for himself because the company, being put under extraordinary administration by the Vatican, could no longer provide it for him. In the final years of his life, being old and sick, it wasn't easy for him to manage things. Once again, he felt abandoned and alone, although he was famous throughout the world. The end of Father Stefano's life was similar to the beginning, because he had to know and feel that he was being guided by Our Lady alone, who was asking of him once again to trust her completely. Distressed and disoriented, he called his friend, Father Cortilio Gabrielli. There's a note. This priest was born in Tierney in 1937, a Xaverian priest since 1965, a close friend and collaborator of Father Stefano. He recalls those moments with emotion and tells how painful this event was for Father Gobbi, who was very worried and called him asking him what he should do and where he could go. Father Cortilio first met Father Stefano in 1977, and in 1979 he took part in the International Marian Movement of Priests retreat in Fatima. He then left for Sierra Leone in Africa. When he came back to Italy, he had the opportunity to see Father Stefano again and had contacts with the Marian movement. One day, while Father Stefano was saying his breviary, he turned to Father Cortilio, pointed his finger at him and said, "You are not going back to Sierra Leone anymore. Our Lady wants you to stay in Italy now and do cenacles for her." He became the regional director for Lombardy, and since 2001 helped Father Stefano with the movement during the times in which the latter was absent from Italy for his Marian travels. Returning to the text, so he asked this priest to help him find a place where he could go because he didn't have a home any longer. Perhaps this suffering offered by Father Gobbi served the cause of the house at Via Taruggia, because in the end, the CSP managed to keep the building. To this day, it is still owned by the company. A consecrated woman of that community confided, "If our Father Stefano were still on earth, we would probably see him coming back here with his old suitcase to that same room after one of his long journeys around the world." End of chapter 4.